Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, and welcome to Pangolin, the conservation podcast. The show dedicated to exploring and amplifying the world's underappreciated conservation stories. The stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. I'm your host, Jack Baker, and today I am joined by Terrance Fleming, the development manager of the Red Panda Network. Terrance is here to discuss what a red panda is, its relationship with the giant panda, and how the Red Panda Network is working across the globe to raise awareness of and secure a future for these incredible little creatures. We also discuss how Terrance first fell in love with the red panda, and what inspired him to want to work with the species. What is really special about this episode is it's actually the first of 2 episodes dedicated to the wonderful world of red pandas. While this week we are focusing on the work that goes on around the world to protect the species, next week we will be back with Sonam Tashi Lama to discuss the Red Panda Network's in situ conservation efforts. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Welcome back to the show. I am now joined by Terrance Fleming, the development manager of the Red Panda Network. He is here to tell us all about this incredible species in the first of 2 parts. You're here to tell us all about kind of the work that goes on with Red Panda Network kind of outside of Nepal. And then next week, we're going to have another episode dedicated to that kind of in situ conservation work. So I suppose the first thing I should say to you is thank you so much for your time and thank you for helping coordinate this kind of 2 episodes special.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really fun. I love talking about red pandas and the work we do. So appreciate it.
Perfect. I do too. So that is an excellent combination. And there's something that I think I want more people to know more about, because I think we all go to the zoo or we all go to wherever we go to see the animals, and you kind of think, oh, they're very cute. And a lot of people, I think they're very cute, but it'll be nice to provide a bit more depth, I think, for people than perhaps they maybe have already. But before we get on to the kind of Red Panda chat, I introduced you briefly there, but could you introduce yourself a bit more in depth, a bit better probably, for the listeners? Tell them a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the development manager for the small U.S. team we have here in Eugene, Oregon. Mm-hmm. And I essentially oversee development, marketing, communications, that sort of thing.
Perfect. Yes, I did want, because it was one of those things that I've never, the title development manager, before, when I was trying to write up questions, I was kind of thinking about how do I, what exactly does that role contain? And that's really confirmed. I was like, I did some Googling and research, and I was like, I'm now feeling very proud of myself. I said, yes, I've nailed it, I think, in my understanding. So that's perfect. But yes, that's really, really interesting. I think, obviously, sets you up perfectly to talk about the red pandas if you're used to communicating all about them. So hopefully we'll get a lot of good information out there for people. And I guess the first question then has to be, we're talking all about them. They are kind of the stars of the show for this episode. Could you tell me a little bit about red pandas and kind of, for anyone who's maybe not as familiar with them, introduce them to the listeners?
Yeah, so red pandas are a small to medium-sized mammal. They're a Himalayan species. They're a high-altitude species. They live at remarkably high elevations. They are an arboreal species, so they spend nearly all their time in trees. They are a very specialized mammal. We can talk more about that. They are a rare and elusive, aside from being an endangered species, they are also rare and elusive just in their temperament and their behavior. And yeah, their range is Nepal, which is where we mostly work. We're also doing some work in Bhutan, which they also have habitat in Bhutan, China, India, and Myanmar, or Burma, so it used to be called, yeah.
Yes. Yes, an interesting, very unique looking iconic species of those kind of areas as well. They're the kind of the flagship almost species. When you think of conservation in those areas, they're kind of one of the main things that comes to mind. And so, yes, it's really fantastic to get to chat about them and learn a little bit more. I was going to ask this in a second, but I think I'll shift this question forward a little bit since we're talking about them. For the fans of Red Pandas out there who maybe knew a lot of what you said previously about them, if there's some kind of fact or interesting story or something about Red Pandas that people might not necessarily know, what is that? What would you tell them?
Well, something, it's sort of an anecdote, but one of the way that I first discovered Red Pandas was when I was probably about 18. I was at the San Diego Zoo and I saw a sign for their Red Panda exhibit, and I was like, never heard of a red panda. What is that? Mm-hmm. And I walk up and I look into the enclosure, and there is what I think is a toddler in a costume. So like a child dressed as a red, whatever that was, a red panda, waddling around on, bipedally. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea that was an actual animal. And, so the first time I ever saw a red panda, it was actually standing on its hind legs, which, is something they do. And while it's really cute, it's actually, sometimes a sign of distress. Mm-hmm. So when you see like photos or videos of red pandas standing upright, they're actually, they're kind of using their body language to let you know how they're feeling, which is whether it's threatened or just anxious. And they're actually really, really good at communicating. They have some unique communication sort of styles where they will also what's called a huff quack. And if you've never heard of a huff quack, it sounds exactly like what you'd imagine a huff quack would sound like. So it's essentially, it sounds like a very upset duck that is, wanting to let you know that they're upset. And that's, so those are some of the ways that red pandas will communicate. So yeah, I mean, they're a very unique species. There's a lot of really interesting and unique features. And I mean, some of the other things that people may not know about them is they're obviously a very cute animal, and everyone knows that. That's widely known. But their cuteness actually has purpose. So their facial structure actually helps them survive. So the what looks like reddish tear marks on their face, similar to sort of like a raccoon, is actually known to keep the sun out of their eyes. So as an arboreal species, red pandas are a little bit closer to the sun, and they're a little bit more exposed to the sun. And especially when they're looking out for predators or food, it's important for them to be able to see that without being blinded by the sun. So and then also the white on their face also has purpose too. The white can actually be luminescent. So it's I don't know if I would say it's bioluminescent, but it especially like the reflection from the moon can actually help mothers find their cubs in the dark. So it actually again helps their survival.
That's fantastic. I'm kind of sat there going, this is new information to me, and I have worked in a zoo and talked about red pandas a lot. So that's really, really interesting actually. Yeah,
there's a lot more I could say too. I mean, they are one of the more unique species I've ever learned about. So
mm-hmm. Yes, that's the thing. I think providing more depth to something that perhaps people not dismiss, but see on first instance and think, oh, that's cute. It's nice to know that there's more purpose and there's more depth there that hopefully people will grow to appreciate. Yeah, and I suppose you kind of talked about it there a little bit, but I was going to ask when you kind of first formed a connection, realized you wanted to work kind of with red pandas. But I suppose maybe was it kind of love at first sight when you saw them in the zoo that first time, or did it take a few visits before you kind of decided this is what I want to do? When was the moment for you?
Well, that was sort of before, I just graduated high school, so I wasn't ready to go save red pandas on a professional level, but I never forgot them. And when I saw the opportunity, I was like, oh yeah, red pandas, because they were, they're still not. I mean, that's starting to change, and it'll probably change when the Pixar movie comes out tomorrow. But, after I saw them, I had never really seen the animal mentioned again until I saw that opportunity, which was, probably 10 years later. So yeah, no, it wasn't, it wasn't yet. I mean, it planted a seed definitely, because I remember that was one of the species, and the San Diego Zoo has a lot of awesome animals, but that was one that definitely stood out and stood up, to make a bad joke. Yeah.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah, there's something that definitely leave an impression when you see that, especially when you're lucky enough to see them moving. I think there's a lot of people will walk past them and look up a tree and think, what is that small ball that's kind of up in the distance? But when you get to see them moving around a little bit more, yes, they're very quick, very, very easy to fall in love with. Very kind of quickly, and they do leave an impression.
Definitely.
And yes, I completely forgotten that film was coming out tomorrow. And I was quite excited when I saw the trailer. I was quite intrigued to see kind of what that's going to be. It's, for listeners, for context for listeners, we're talking. Is it Turning Red? I think the film's called, is coming out tomorrow or something.
Yep.
So I don't know if I can endorse it, but it sounds interesting in theory. Don't, if it's rubbish when it comes out, don't blame it on me if you've watched it, but it sounds intriguing at least.
Definitely.
But yes, I guess before we go down a movie tangent, yes, that would be too easy for me to. Yes.
Well, real quick,
Yeah.
because we're talking about something that people may not know about this animal, which is something that's really important, is that they are the only remaining species in their family. So they are, they're in the Alurdiae family, and every other species that has been among the Alurdiae family are now extinct. So they're the only remaining species. So, so there's literally no animal like them. I mean, they're compared to raccoons, they're compared to the weasel family. They are obviously associated with giant pandas a lot, but they're not really related to any of those animals. I mean, you could probably argue that they're maybe most closely connected to weasel-like animals like skunks and raccoons as well. But they are a very unique species, and so their conservation is really important to the sort of to our global biodiversity and our global biodiversity like heritage. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, actually, because yes, you would assume somewhere down the line they are quite closely related to their namesake, Giant Panda, or whatever it is. You'd think there was some kind of link there, but it's actually interesting that, in fact, no, not really. I
Just kidding.
I'll need to. I'm gonna have to fact check this and put it in, but I'm sure it was something. Was the Red Panda named first? And do you know that? I feel like it was the Red Panda actually was named prior to the Giant Panda, and the Giant Panda has come along afterwards and stolen some of the thunder from it. I think that's true. I'm going to have to double check that, but I seem to remember when it came down to naming and things, they're kind of... The Giant Panda was linked to the Red Panda rather than the other way around, I think.
Yeah, so the Red... You're exactly right. The Red Panda was discovered about 50 years before the Giant Panda.
Yes, so if there you go. If there's any kind of links there, it's not. It's people trying to cling to them, not the other way around.
Well, I mean, yeah, and really their relationship makes sense, because if you think about it, panda essentially means bamboo eater, right? Like that's what it can be. That's where I think at least the word's origins come from. So what they have in common is that they both love bamboo, and they're both very specialized animals in that their diet is 90+% bamboo, which makes sense because bamboo and they're not the only species that specializes in bamboo. There's also a lemur that specializes in bamboo, and I'm sure you know more about this stuff than I do doing your podcast and everything. But they it's a plant that grows very abundantly. There's a lot of different species, and they can kind of dominate an ecosystem. And so essentially these animals have filled a niche, and have essentially evolved into being able to digest this plant, which is very difficult to digest. Red pandas only are able to digest about 24% of what they eat, which is why they eat so much of it. And I'm sure giant pandas are similar. So they fit this niche, and became a very specialized animal in doing so, because they're one of the few animals that can digest this plant and, eat enough of it to, sustain themselves. So yeah, that's probably where their connection to giant pandas sort of began.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, actually, and it's something that just has got me thinking about the fact that I remember teaching kids about giant pandas, and it's just got me thinking about naming conventions, because the obviously panda, the bamboo eater, but if in kind of where the giant panda is from, giant panda in Chinese is Da Xiong Mao, which means big bear cat. So it's interesting to see how different perceptions and different worldviews and different kind of people who have discovered, quote unquote, discovered these animals have named them, or kind of the translated differently. And I'd be really interested. It's a tangent that I'll have to go down in my own time, because it's probably leads to so many different other questions. But it's an interesting kind of divergence there in naming and different things. Both, I think.
Well, yeah. I don't mean to cut you off, but you mentioned divergence, and the other sort of feature that they do share with giant pandas, which is related to eating bamboo, is that they have the pseudo thumb. Or the extra thumb is what some people like to call it. So they literally have this extra digit, and it's believed to. I don't know if it originally evolved to be used for this, but it essentially helps them to grip bamboo stems, like giant pandas. So, but red pandas will also use their pseudo thumb to help them climb as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's something I actually to highlight arboreal for people, because it's not a word that's thrown around by anyone outside of probably conservation and animal people. Arboreal means they're up trees a lot. If you're kind of were wondering, if you're a relatively new person to the animal world, they're up trees a lot. So that, yes, it makes sense that they would need all of that assistance to climb and kind of get around. There's been a red panda recently born at Edinburgh Zoo, where I work and frequent very, very often, even when I'm not working. And there's something about watching the little ones climb, where they just have this confidence of they're kind of you're kind of like, you're very, very high up, but the parents tend to be a bit more kind of careful, and the little ones are all over the place, up, down, round, running. Kind of imagine a very excited dog running around your kind of garden, except they're 20, 30, 40 feet up in the air, which makes you slightly nervous to watch, but it's fantastic and exceptionally cute and interesting. So yes, for anyone who was wondering, arboreal, they're up the trees a lot. And I think something, now that we kind of know a bit more about them, I think you touched on it a little while ago, by mentioning kind of that they are endangered. And I think that's kind of part of the reason I was inspired to reach out to you guys, was that I think a lot of kind of charismatic animals people assume are fine because they're charismatic. They must get lots of support, which they do. They have charities like you supporting them. But that doesn't mean that they're safe and they're kind of fine, and we can just ignore the kind of endangered and kind of threats to them. And so that's kind of why I kind of feel they fall under this category that we kind of look at, which is vaguely kind of underappreciated or misunderstood things, because they're exceptionally popular, yet still endangered. And I wondered, could you tell the listeners a little bit about why that might be and what kind of threats that they do face?
Yeah, so their main threat is habitat loss, primarily deforestation. The sort of a rising threat is poaching, and that's essentially exacerbating the impacts of habitat loss. So there's a lot of human population growth in their habitat areas. So a lot of forest gets converted to agriculture, residential, rangeland, and it's also fragmented and degraded by human activities such as herding and things like that. So.
Mm. Yes. It's a sad but common theme, I think, throughout when discussions of conservation, is this kind of conflict of, yes, people needing more and more space and kind of not necessarily being able to, or leaving the animals or the habitats that these animals need be. And yes, that of course increases the likelihood, I suppose, that they will come into contact with people and then be kind of poached or whatever it is that happens to them after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. I suppose next week we're kind of, as I said at the start, we're having this kind of 2-week discussion. This week with you, and then next week with Sonam about the kind of in situ threats and kind of what you guys are doing to kind of prevent the kind of threats on the ground within Nepal and the other kind of habitats. But I think the question I have for you today is that obviously habitat loss and all of these things are very locally based. What is it that you do kind of globally, maybe removed from Nepal, from your position in the United States? What is it that you do to kind of help the protection of red pandas more widely than just their kind of native habitats?
So globally, we really try to educate people and raise awareness. I mean, while they are growing in popularity, I'm still surprised by how many people I come in contact with that don't know about red pandas. Maybe they've heard of them, but yeah, have no idea that they're endangered, really have no idea how unique and specialized they are and how important they are to global biodiversity. So yeah, I mean, so we have International Red Panda Day every year, and that's a really important day for red panda conservation. Really just spreading the word about them and, engaging people with our programs and getting involved and supporting our community-based conservation efforts.
I mean, I suppose it's one of those things that when you are interested in animals and conservation, you're in this kind of bubble of course people would know about red pandas. They must know about them everywhere. They're fantastic. They're wonderful. You have to know. But I suppose actually, when you remove my immediate circle from me, if I was to talk to people a bit beyond that, that actually does make sense that perhaps people wouldn't be aware of this tiny kind of little animal that is completely removed from anything that they're used to, or maybe they haven't seen, or just maybe haven't had the opportunity to watch the documentaries about them or visit the zoo and see them. Yeah, that's really interesting. Is it kind of, how do you deal with that? How do you kind of get around that issue of being? Is it kind of I don't know how to phrase it. How do you get around that issue? That kind of of not people not knowing.
Well, it's funny. This is another anecdotal story, but I had a call with someone from Facebook a couple of years ago, and I assumed they knew about. I mean, they work for Facebook, right? I assumed they knew about red pandas. I mean, red panda videos are pretty popular on Facebook, and they hadn't. And I mean, I thought they were kidding at first, and then I realized they weren't, and it was just kind of a reminder of that, and you said it, exactly right, where when we're around our friends and our community, we tend to be around people that know have some of the shared interests. Obviously, you work at a zoo. I work for a conservation organization. So a lot of the people I come in contact do know about red pandas. I mean, honestly, a lot of the people who I didn't meet through this work, they learned about red pandas maybe through me or, something like that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the people outside of our bubbles and our networks, unless they've been to a zoo that has red pandas, and a lot of zoos don't have red pandas, they just might not have, and maybe they just, haven't seen videos on them and stuff. So, obviously the internet is vast, and it's interesting when I come in contact with someone who hasn't heard of red pandas, but it's also fun to be able to tell them about them. So it's like, whoa, you've never heard about red pandas? Okay, well, like, get ready, and then obviously I, bust out some photos and videos, and and so it's fun. And also it's a reminder that, we still have a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of people we need to reach. So yeah, it's sort of it's a lot of different feelings.
Yes. It's one of those things that it's quite good because there's hundreds of thousands of millions of people out there for you to share your passion and your interest with. It's just you want to have shared it all with them right now so they can be working to help you kind of protect, with whether that be kind of donating or whatever it is that you are wanting them to do. It's kind of tricky to. Yes, I suppose it's a difficult thing to weigh up in your mind, the positives and the negatives or the confusing things there. I wondered kind of this might again be a kind of silly question, but I suppose when you're talking to these people who've never they maybe don't know about red pandas, you're trying to advertise these animals as these kind of interesting things. I wondered, kind of from your experience of being the development manager, do you have, this is more of a personal interest question. Maybe the listeners will find it interesting. I don't know. But do you find that it's more effective to go in with the kind of look how amazing, cute, interesting these animals are? Or do you go in with the kind of conservation message first of like, these are threatened, we need to protect them? Or do they kind of come in at the same time? What is the kind of approach that you take to something like that?
So, I mean, one of the ways we like to convey the Red Panda message, if you will, is by saying they're unique, important, and endangered. So, unique is first. So this is why, this is, let me introduce you to Red Pandas. This is the unique features. This is, who they are, what they do. And then we flow into important. This is why they're critical to their ecosystem, and their ecosystem, the Himalayan ecoregion that they're a flagship species of is very important to global conservation. I mean, it's really big. It encompasses a lot of area, a lot of species, a lot of endangered, and a lot of unique and vulnerable species. And it's also a very important place for people. There's a lot of people that live there, a lot of people that depend on the ecosystems for their livelihoods. And so they are an extremely important, flagship indicator species, and they're also an umbrella species. So they're really important species to this really important area. So it's, important times two. So, and then from there it flows to, and by the way, there are also maybe as few as 2,500 left in the world, or in the wild. So, and that usually will, get a reaction because that's a shockingly low number. I mean, there are estimates that put them as high as 10,000. So it's somewhere between 2,500 to 10,000, which, I mean, if you think about that, either way, it's not many. So, that's usually how I like to, introduce Red Pandas to people in sort of that order.
It makes sense because it gets them in love, and then you kind of hit them with the kind of, they're important, they're fantastic, they're unique, they're special, but also we need to act now. And it's interesting knowing that kind of estimate as well. I think it's, especially if you put it in context of animals that people always consider to be endangered. If we're to throw it back to kind of the giant panda that we were talking about a while ago, there's, I think, 1,800 of them, and they are always talked about in the news. They're the flagship species for WWF and all these things of kind of these, look at this, look how endangered, and we need to save the giant panda. And then you consider this animal that maybe isn't talked about as much, that, hang on, they're just as a problem, have just as many problems, and there is just as few of them. That kind of probably connects quite well with people, and it gives them some perspective of how important it is to act now to protect them.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that you brought up giant pandas again, because I think a lot of the time when it comes to conservation, it can feel pretty disheartening, right? Like, I mean, a lot of times we're talking about how few of this species there are, and what's threatening this species, and with the giant pandas, they're no longer an endangered species. And growing up, I always knew them as an endangered species. I mean, like you said, they're the symbol of one of the biggest conservation groups out there. And they're no longer listed as endangered. So, I also like to tell people, like, look, I mean, worst case scenario, there might be as few as 2,500 red pandas, but there was a time when it wasn't looking so good for giant pandas either. And look how far we've come with them. So, let's use that as inspiration, as guidance to find the same success with red pandas.
And I think I was recently speaking to Deborah Tabart of the Australian Koala Foundation, and I think they have a similar in the good thing about red pandas and selling them to people is, with some species like elephants or tigers or whatever it is, there's this conflict that can occur between these kind of larger species and people. Whereas with the red pandas, not like, you kind of have the comparison there of the giant pandas to go, look at the success. But then you also don't have the negatives, which can sometimes come along with conservation, which is there's less likely to be this kind of conflict, I suppose, between them and people. They're kind of, or something that can be saved and can be used as a flagship to preserve lots of other species, because they are so kind of, I don't want to say, they're just kind of will keep themselves to themselves almost. They're kind of, they're kind of off doing their own thing.
Yeah, the situation with red pandas is also unique. Where you mentioned elephants and tigers and obviously, they're more obviously a larger species. One of those is a predator, which obviously adds another level of complication, especially when it comes to human wildlife conflict, which is something you mentioned as well. Side sort of fun fact: red pandas are actually classified as a carnivore as well, which is a little counterintuitive since they 95% of their diet is not meat. Actually, probably more than that is not meat, but 95% of their diet is bamboo. And then they'll eat berries and other things. And every once in a while they'll eat like an egg or I've never actually heard of it happening, but apparently they'll eat a bird. I think they could catch one. They actually can move really fast when they need to. But anyway, so the sort of unique situation with the red pandas is that they're a smaller animal and they're not a threat to people. What's interesting is local farmers and herders used to fear that they would hunt their livestock, because they didn't really know anything about them. They would see them sometimes, but they wouldn't really know anything about them. What they ate and what they were doing. So they would fear that they would hunt their livestock. But essentially, the conflict kind of comes into just people hunting them, thinking that they might be worth something. They see their tails, they see their pretty coat, and they think that they might be able to sell them in a local market and raise money because, the main sort of driver of a lot of these threats to red pandas is poverty. And so, one of our we emphasize sustainable livelihood and alternative income programs because, until we sort of mitigate poverty in their range areas, it's going to be really difficult to save red pandas. So, that's sort of their version of human wildlife conflict. And what's interesting too is when it comes to poaching, which, like I mentioned, is a rising threat to red pandas. They, people will hunt them and everything, but then there's sort of like what's called a fake market for them. So there isn't actually a demand for their tails and their pelts the way that poachers believe that there is. So they'll, go to sell them and they'll only make they essentially will only make like a US dollar for their pelt, which obviously isn't very much for the risk of killing a red panda, of killing a protected and an endangered species. So there's kind of this fake market sort of driving poaching. So it's kind of it's again a unique situation. It's sort of a complicated situation.
That's really interesting. Like it's not something I'd heard of before because you would assume you would hunt and go look for things that you can then sell at high value because there is a high demand. I had no idea about the kind of hunting for kind of almost to create the demand because if you're kind of like it just seems counterintuitive, but I can see how yes it is important to emphasize the kind of supporting the people round about the habitats, the projects that do that. Because then you can protect and then there's less need and then there's kind of less need for them to go out and kind of find these animals which in the end aren't going to make them any money and help them really anyway. It's a complicated cycle. Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I mean, it is complicated, but it also is simple when you think about it that our country director in Nepal, Angpuri Sherpa, he has a saying that I like to mention whenever I can, which is conservation cannot happen on an empty stomach. And it's something that I really use as motivation because, I've been with RPN since about 2013. And the more work I do with them, just the more I see proof of that and just the urgency of being able to support these local people. Because if they're struggling to meet their basic needs to support themselves and their families, I mean, it's really hard to ask people to, make sacrifices and do these extra things and, sort of complicate their lives anymore in order to preserve this species or preserve the environment. It's only really when they,
are able to feed themselves and clothe themselves and support themselves, can we, support them in conserving local wildlife? So while it is a complicated situation, which with any species when it comes to human wildlife conflict and preservation is, with red pandas, sometimes it feels like it is a little bit more complicated and unique, but it really can be simplified and broken down when we just think like, we need to provide as much support for these people in sustainable ways in order to conserve the species.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yes, I think it's a really good thing to hear, especially from kind of a charity that you have offices outside of the area. Because I think there's sometimes this tendency for people who aren't necessarily in the places where these things are happening to think we just need to solve the problems. We just need to kind of we need to do this, but then without taking into account necessarily what's happening in the place where the animal or the plant or whatever it is they want to conserve is. So it's really good to hear kind of a perspective of, oh, we've thought about this. We've thought this all the way through. And there is kind of people there working on it. We're kind of supporting and building up these things. Because yes, I completely agree. Speaking to kind of people from the Lemur Conservation Network and things about the kind of the work in Madagascar that's going on, it's, I think, a similar story of you can't conserve a reef or you can't conserve lemurs if the people who live on the side by the shore near the reef or live on the edge of the forest are starving, because they're going to do you have to support them and you have to help protect them. And ultimately, it might not be, I think a lot of people have this vision of conservation maybe when they're younger that, oh, you're going to go out into the forest and you're going to save the animals. But in fact, it's a lot more complicated than that. And there is a whole kind of circle and kind of cycle that goes on around about. And it just goes to show, I suppose, how connected we are with nature. As much as we sometimes like to think necessarily humans aren't animals or aren't connected to nature in any way, we're above it, some people may say, or may think. Actually, there's important links that we have to solve and to kind of keep developing to kind of help all of the animals and all of the plants.
Yeah, definitely. And a sort of unambiguous example of this is, I mentioned poaching, and obviously, poachers are often seen as, they're sort of villainized, which kind of makes sense. Obviously, it's very easy to be angry at poachers, but like we mentioned, what essentially drives poaching, especially in these areas, is poverty. And a lot of these people don't want to be poachers because there's a lot of risk of being a poacher. It's dangerous, and it's also risky as far as you can be punished legally for it. And so one of the ways that we intervene on this rise in poaching is we actually will sometimes hire former poachers, or people who don't want to poach anymore, and they're literally only doing it just to support themselves and their families, and hire them as what we call forest guardians. So they actually begin earning income for doing the exact opposite of what they were doing before, essentially, with more sustainable revenue and with far less risk. So that's sort of an example of a community-based program that is intervening on an urgent situation in a way that is supporting local people and helping to alleviate poverty.
That's fantastic. It's really interesting to hear about and good to hear about. And I suppose kind of links really kind of well into my next question, which was actually, I wanted to ask about some of the biggest success stories maybe you'd seen at your time. And kind of, we talk a lot about threats on the show and all of these things and how we solve them. And sometimes that conversation, I think we've managed to keep it pretty positive and solutions based almost in this conversation, but sometimes it can go downhill and kind of be a bit of a dark corridor to go down. So I always like to bring it back and talk about success stories. And I wanted to know, even though we've kept it pretty light and we've talked about a lot of success so far, what are some of the biggest success stories that you've seen at your time with the Red Panda Network?
Yeah, I've seen a lot. I mean, one of the cooler stories is of a lady in eastern Nepal who, so essentially to give some context, a lot of the people who live in red panda habitat, at least in Nepal, they rely on what are called traditional stoves. So these are often mud or brick stoves, and honestly, sometimes they're just kind of pits in their home that they use for cooking and heating. And there's a lot of adverse sort of consequences for using these stoves, and that includes increased habitat loss. So they rely on more fuel wood than is sustainable, and so they require more fuel wood, and then they also release pollution. And because they're indoors, they're in these people's homes, they create indoor smoke that is very harmful for people. So one of our programs it's our improved cooking stove program, and we distribute them to local people, and these are fuel efficient, and they're metal stoves that they essentially they release no pollution. So they actually have chimneys, so all the smoke goes outdoors, and they reduce fuel wood usage by like 50%. So they and there's I was writing an article for a website for our blog on a lady named Nima who, she spoke of how much these stoves hindered her and her family's life, with how much time they would have to spend gathering fuel wood, and also just the effects of the smoke and how it was, really harming their health. And just sort of her testimony of how much their lives instantly changed once they got these new stoves, and how much more free time they had to do other things, which is something we don't think about too, is, when you're sort of forest dependent, which these communities often are, you spend so much of your time out gathering resources that you need to survive. And, something like a fuel efficient stove just changes that and provides all this time to do, spend more time with your family, do other important things that can really help your livelihood. And also they just felt better. They weren't breathing in the smoke all the time. And I got really emotional, when I was writing that article. And then I'll provide another example too. I mentioned our Forest Guardian program, and just seeing how that has impacted local communities is really remarkable. I mean, it's a lot of the people who are involved with Red Panda Network. It's one of our favorite programs, and it's probably one of our most popular programs. But there is a forest guardian named Manuka who became pretty popular among our audience because of a film called The Firefox Guardian. And if you haven't seen that film, I highly recommend it. It's from a filmmaker named Gunjan Menon, and she's a just outstanding filmmaker. And it's essentially about this lady named Manuka, who's the forest guardian, and her story of going from, very oppressed and just marginalized to becoming a woman who is gaining, financial independence, who is gaining confidence, who is able to be more involved in community decision making, which women in a lot of these rural communities aren't, and just how much her life was limited. Opportunities just were scarce, and just by becoming involved as a forest guardian, how that changed everything. And one of our priorities right now is recruiting more women into our conservation work, and specifically our forest guardian program, because we are seeing that it really can be life changing for these women who oftentimes they face just prevalent cultural barriers that kind of keep them sort of stuck at just child rearing and sort of household chores sort of roles. So those stories stand out, and there's many others. I mean, we're very community involved, and all of our programs, as I mentioned, are community based. So all of our programs start with the people, and they benefit the people, and they and they involve the people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And the thing that kind of came to mind while you were talking about the kind of empowerment of women and kind of in these communities was the success of the Black Mambas in South Africa. And I suppose it's kind of a mirror kind of image of kind of this conservation group of women who are extremely successful, extremely good at what they do, extremely kind of independent, and kind of yes, are admired worldwide, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of have that same kind of, well, you've had one fantastic case study. Hopefully, even more will follow for your work. Yeah, in the future. That's fantastic. It's fantastic.
That's cool. You brought up black mamas because I haven't heard about that. I'll have to look it up. But I I love snakes. And one of the real quick, one of the unique things about red pandas also is they can actually sort of smell with their tongues, kind of like snakes. So that's another unique thing about the animal.
That's a very bizarre. That's really interesting. I
Yeah.
did not.
Yeah.
That's odd but fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're just. This is the thing. I feel like after you've done listening to this episode, listeners, go away and keep googling and reading books and reading because you're just going to find out more and more probably bizarre but wonderful things about this animal that maybe you had underestimated or not even heard of or whatever it is. It's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. And that kind of is bringing us almost to the end. I suppose we've kind of talked about all these successes. We've talked about kind of the Red Panda, and I think we've probably got a lot of people interested in doing something or kind of wanting to spread the word about them. And I wondered, kind of getting towards the end of the interview. So a question I always like to ask my guests is, if someone is inspired by the Red Panda or anything that you've said today about conservation in your work, what should they do? What should members of the general public who maybe aren't in the places where red pandas are found, what should they be doing to help support red panda conservation?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, not to be too predictable or cliche, but our website is a great place to start. You know, our sort of goal was to create this all-in-one stop hub of information and resources for people to get involved and to help others get involved. Because, you know, like we were talking about before, they are an animal that still needs some public attention. They, you know, still aren't getting sort of the engagement that they need in order for us to really win this battle, you know, or to save this species. So, you know, check out our website and tell your friends. I mean, this movie that's coming out, I think, is going to help spread the word, but it's important to make sure that we're, you know, sharing responsible messaging. So obviously we need to make sure that we're not sharing how, you know, great of a pet this animal would be, because, you know, while there may not be a demand, the demand that, you know, was previously thought of for their tails and their hides, there is a demand for them as pets, unfortunately. So there is a black market pet trade for red pandas. So, you know, we want to, and we emphasize this on our website, you know, make sure you're telling people how awesome red pandas are, how much they need our help. But they, you know, are a wild animal that should remain in the wild. And they shouldn't be taken and sold as pets. So yeah, so I'd say our website is a great place to start.
That's fantastic. And I think I'll put links to all of that in the kind of description of the episode so people can go click right down there and kind of find it so easily. I'll do all the work for you. You guys just need to go out and click the link and go and do some reading about it. And yes, I really like the point about the kind of pet trade that you've made there, because yes, it's one of those things after Finding Nemo and Finding Dory and all of these films come out who base themselves around an animal. It raises awareness of that animal and people fall in love with it. But it can have a lot of side effects that are perhaps unexpected as well, of kind of things about pet trade and all sorts of, yes, negative connotations. So yeah, being responsible in that way is excellent advice, and sharing responsible things. I'm going to have to watch this film now. I was intrigued. Now I'm going to have to watch it and see, because I feel like there may be questions come in about it.
Yeah, what's interesting about the film is, like, I mean, it's sort of a girl who, when she gets excited or upset, she becomes this red panda, which is funny to me because red pandas are very mellow. You know, they're even lethargic some of the time. I mean, you know, their diet is bamboo. I mean, how much energy can you get from bamboo? So yeah, so it looks like an interesting film. I'm excited to watch it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I didn't realize it came out so soon, so I will be it's fantastic. But that's brilliant. That kind of I guess brings us towards the end. We've highlighted your website. Is there anything else, any last minute things that you wanted to highlight for listeners, any social media or whatever it is that you'd like them to go and visit, or is the website the main port of call?
Yeah, and our social media, we have social media accounts on all channels, and it's easy to find us. We're at Red Panda Network, all of them. And one sort of side mention is that it's our 15-year anniversary. So we've been an organization for 15 years, and so that's what we're celebrating this year. So yeah, come check out our website, and hopefully you can celebrate with us.
Perfect. Yes, I will be. And I'll make sure to funnel as many people that way as I can as well. But yes, that brings us to the end. And so I just want to say kind of a massive thank you, Terrance. That's been really, really interesting and fantastic. And I've learned a lot. So hopefully the listeners have as well. And we'll be off spreading this message to everyone. Yes, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. This has been really fun, and really appreciate what you're doing. I love pangolins too. Speaking of a unique species, I mean, wow, they are a very unique species. Yeah, so keep doing what you're doing. It's really great.
Thank you so much. And yes, for all the listeners out there, thank you all for listening as well. That brings us to the end of another episode, but this is not the end of the discussion of Red Pandas. We'll be back next week with Sonam, who's based in Nepal, to talk all about his work and kind of the work that's going on there, kind of in situ that the Red Panda Network is doing. So make sure to tune back in for that. You can also find us on social media. We're on all of them: LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at Pangolin Podcast. So you can just find us on there. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on the Red Panda episode that's coming up next week as well, or any future episodes after that. We've got some excellent guests coming up very, very soon, which I'm very excited about. So make sure and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of that. But with all that said, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Terrance, once again for all of your insights. And yes, until next time, goodbye.